In the darkest corner of the galaxy's most notorious slave market, where dreams go to die and hope is sold to the highest bidder, something extraordinary was about to happen. It wasn't the gleaming auction halls or the wealthy collectors that would change everything. It was a simple act of kindness from someone who had every reason to walk away. What happens when the unwanted meets the unexpected? When age becomes wisdom and rejection transforms into the greatest gift the universe has ever seen. This is the story of Kale, an alien wolf whose time seemed to have run out, and Maya, a human girl who saw something everyone else had missed. Sometimes the most powerful connections form in the most unlikely places. Sometimes salvation comes not from strength, but from understanding. And sometimes, just sometimes, being too old means you're exactly the right age for a miracle. The galaxy was about to learn that the greatest treasures are often found where no one thinks to look. The metal cage barely contained Kale's massive frame as he lay curled in the corner, his silver gray fur dulled by months of neglect. His amber eyes, once bright and fierce, now held the weight of countless disappointments. At 47 years old, he was considered ancient by the standards of his species, the lycanthropy. In the prime of his life, he had been a warrior, a protector of his pack, feared across 3-star systems. Now, he was just another piece of unwanted cargo in Nexus Station's underground auction house. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowded hall, echoing off the grimy walls where hundreds of beings from across the galaxy gathered to buy and sell sentient lives. Next up, we have lot number 4,847, a lycanthropy male, approximately 47 standard years old. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and Kale could hear the disappointment in their voices even before the bidding began. Too old for labor, someone called out from the back. Past his fighting prime, another voice added with a dismissive laugh. Kale's ears flattened against his head, but he had heard it all before. 6 auctions in the past 3 months, and each time the same result. His age had become his curse, marking him as worthless in a galaxy that valued only youth and strength. The slave traders who had captured him during the raid on his homeworld had been convinced they had struck gold when they saw his size and build. A lycanthropy warrior could fetch enough credits to buy a small ship, but that was before they learned his age. The auctioneer tried to drum up interest. Strong build, excellent teeth, no major health issues. Starting bid at 500 credits. The silence that followed was deafening. Kale closed his eyes, preparing for another humiliating return to the holding cells. In the middle of the crowd, a young human woman pushed through the sea of alien traders and collectors. Maya Chan was 22 years old, with short black hair and determined dark eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She wore the simple clothes of a maintenance worker, which is exactly what she was on Nexus Station. But today was her day off, and curiosity had drawn her to the auction house she had only heard whispers about in the station's lower levels. Maya had never intended to buy anyone. The very idea of slavery made her stomach turn, a feeling that had only grown stronger since she had left Earth to work in the outer colonies. But something about the massive wolf-like being in the cage caught her attention. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, even in defeat, or the intelligence she could see flickering in those amber eyes. While everyone else saw an old, worthless animal, Maya saw something different. "Do I hear 500? The auctioneer called out, his enthusiasm already waning. 400? 300? The crowd was losing interest fast, already looking toward the next cage where a younger specimen waited. Maya found herself stepping forward before she fully realized what she was doing. 100 credits, she called out, her voice barely audible over the crowd's noise. The auctioneer paused, surprised to hear any bid at all. "We have 100 credits from the young lady in the front. Do I hear 150? The silence stretched on. Nobody else was interested in bidding on what they saw as a worthless investment. Maya's heart pounded as she realized what she had just done. 100 credits was nearly half of her monthly salary, money she had been saving to eventually buy passage back to Earth. Going once, going twice, sold to the young human for 100 credits. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through Kale's entire world. He opened his eyes and looked directly at Maya for the first time. There was something in her gaze that he had not seen in months, something that made his heart skip a beat. It was not pity or disgust or calculation. It was kindness, pure and simple, and it hit him like a physical blow. Maya approached the cage slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled out her credit chip to complete the transaction. She had no idea what she was going to do with a 7-foot-tall alien wolf, or even where she was going to keep him. Her apartment in the station's residential quarter was barely big enough for herself, let alone someone of Kale's size. First-time buyer, the auctioneer asked as he processed the payment. Piece of advice, young lady. Don't expect much from this one. Old lycanthropy lose their spirit pretty quick in captivity. You might want to consider putting him to work in the mines or the waste processing plants. That's about all he's good for now. Maya's jaw tightened at the casual cruelty in the man's voice, but she said nothing. She completed the transaction and received the control collar that would supposedly keep Kale compliant. The collar was a standard piece of slave equipment, designed to deliver painful shocks if the wearer tried to escape or disobey direct orders. As the cage door swung open, Kale slowly uncurled himself and stepped out. Even hunched over, he towered above Maya, his powerful frame a reminder of what he had once been. The other buyers and sellers in the auction house gave them a wide berth, some laughing at what they saw as Maya's foolish purchase. "Come on," Maya said softly, not sure if Kale could understand Standard Galactic or if she would need to use the collar's translation function. "Let's get out of here." To her surprise, Kale nodded and followed her toward the exit. His movement was slow and careful, as if he was afraid that any sudden motion might change her mind. Maya noticed the way other beings in the auction house stared at them, some with amusement, others with disgust. She found herself walking taller, her chin raised defiantly against their judgment. The walk through Nexus Station's corridors was awkward and silent. Maya was acutely aware of the stares they received from other station residents. Lycanthropy were rare in this part of the galaxy, and the sight of a young human woman leading one through the civilian areas was bound to attract attention. She could hear whispered conversations following in their wake, speculation about what she planned to do with her purchase. Kale, for his part, was studying his new owner with growing confusion. In his 47 years, he had learned to read people quickly. It was a skill that had kept him alive through countless battles and political negotiations back on his homeworld. Maya Chun was unlike any human he had encountered in the slave markets. She was nervous, yes, but not afraid of him. She was uncertain, but not cruel. Most puzzling of all, she seemed genuinely concerned about his well-being. When they reached Maya's apartment block, she paused at the entrance, suddenly, realizing the full magnitude of what she had done. The building's regulations were strict about pets, and she was pretty sure they did not make exceptions for 7-foot-tall alien wolves, regardless of their legal status. "I should probably mention," Maya said, turning to face Kale directly for the first time since leaving the auction house, "I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing here." Kale tilted his head slightly, a gesture that was unmistakably canine despite his humanoid features. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough from disuse, but his Standard Galactic was perfect. "Neither do I, young one. Neither do I." It was the first time in months that anyone had spoken to him as if he were a person rather than property, and the simple acknowledgement of his personhood hit Maya like a revelation. She had not just bought a slave. She had inadvertently rescued someone who had been treated as less than human for far too long. The elevator ride to Maya's floor was cramped, with Kale having to duck his head to fit inside the small space. Maya found herself stealing glances at him, noticing details that the poor lighting of the auction house had hidden. His fur was not actually gray, but a complex pattern of silver, white, and darker gray that would have been beautiful if properly cared for. His hands were more human than wolf-like, with opposable thumbs and long, clever fingers. Most striking were his eyes, which held an intelligence and depth that spoke of a rich inner life that captivity had not managed to crush. Maya's apartment was a standard station residential unit, consisting of a small living area, a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a bedroom that barely qualified as more than a closet. As they stepped inside, Maya realized that Kale would not even be able to stand upright in most of the space. "I'm sorry," she said, gesturing helplessly at the cramped quarters. "I wasn't exactly planning for company." Kale looked around the apartment slowly, taking in the simple furnishings and personal touches that marked it as a real home rather than just a place to sleep. There were books scattered on the small table, actual paper books rather than digital readers. The walls held photographs of Earth landscapes and what appeared to be family members. A small plant sat on the windowsill, somehow managing to thrive despite the artificial atmosphere of the space station. "It is perfect," Kale said simply, and Maya was surprised by the emotion in his voice. She followed his gaze and tried to see her apartment through his eyes. After months in cages and holding cells, even this small space must seem luxurious. The realization made her chest tighten with an emotion she could not quite name. "Are you hungry?" Maya asked, moving toward the kitchenette. "I don't know what lycanthropy usually eat, but I have some protein rations and synthesized vegetables." "I have not had a proper meal in quite some time," Kale admitted. "Anything would be appreciated." As Maya busied herself preparing food, she found herself stealing glances at Kale, who had settled carefully on the floor near the window, his large frame folded in on itself to fit in the space. There was something profoundly dignified about the way he carried himself, even in such humble circumstances. She began to understand that she had not just bought someone at auction. She had somehow become responsible for a person with his own history, his own pain, and his own dreams that had been temporarily crushed but not destroyed. The simple act of sharing a meal together felt revolutionary after everything Kale had endured. Maya had prepared a plate of food and handed it to him along with utensils, treating him as she would any guest in her home. The protein rations were nothing special, standard station fare that most people complained about regularly. But to Kale, who had been surviving on scraps and prison food for months, it tasted like a feast. They ate in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts about the strange turn their lives had taken. Maya found herself wondering about Kale's past, about the warrior he had mentioned being, about the homeworld that was now just a memory. Kale, meanwhile, was trying to process the kindness he was experiencing, something he had almost forgotten existed in the galaxy. As the artificial day cycle of the station began to shift toward evening, Maya realized she had no idea what the sleeping arrangements would be. Her apartment had one small bed, and Kale was far too large to fit on the couch, even if he could have managed to fold himself onto it. "You can take the bed," Maya offered. "I'll sleep on the couch." Kale looked at her with something approaching shock. "You would give up your own bed for me?" "You're my guest," Maya said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The concept of being treated as a guest rather than property was so foreign to Kale after his months in captivity that he felt his throat tighten with emotion he had thought long buried. He had been a leader once, responsible for the safety and well-being of dozens of pack members. The idea of allowing a young woman to sleep uncomfortably while he took her bed went against every instinct he possessed. "I will take the floor," he said firmly. "It will be more comfortable than anything I have experienced in recent months." Maya started to protest, but something in Kale's expression told her that this was important to him, a way of maintaining some dignity and autonomy in a situation where he had very little of either. Instead, she gathered some blankets and pillows, creating a makeshift bed on the floor that would at least provide some cushioning. As they settled in for the night, the artificial lights of the station dimming to simulate darkness, both Maya and Kale found themselves wide awake, processing the events of the day. Maya was beginning to understand the full weight of what she had done, not just financially, but emotionally. She had essentially adopted another person, someone with needs and feelings and a complex past that she knew nothing about. Kale, meanwhile, was experiencing something he had not felt in so long he had almost forgotten what it was called. Hope. For the first time since his capture, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his story was not over. Maybe there was still a chance for him to be more than just a discarded piece of property in a galaxy that had forgotten his worth. In the quiet darkness of Maya's small apartment, two unlikely souls had found each other, setting in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about friendship, loyalty, and the power of seeing someone for who they truly were rather than what the world had labeled them to be. Maya woke to the sound of quiet movement in her apartment. For a moment, she was disoriented, forgetting about the massive alien presence that now shared her space. Then, she saw Kale carefully arranging the blankets she had given him, folding them with military precision despite his obvious attempt to move silently. "Good morning," she said softly, sitting up on the couch where she had eventually fallen asleep despite her initial plan to stay awake and figure out her next steps. Kale turned toward her, and Maya was struck by how different he looked in the gentle morning light filtering through her small window. The harsh fluorescent lighting of the auction house had hidden the natural nobility of his bearing. The way his amber eyes seemed to hold depths of experience and wisdom that his supposed worthlessness had masked. "I did not mean to wake you," Kale said, his deep voice carefully modulated to avoid disturbing any neighbors. "I'm accustomed to rising early." Maya stretched, working out the kinks from sleeping on the couch, and realized that this was her reality now. She had a 7-foot-tall lycanthropy warrior living in her tiny apartment, and she still had no concrete plan for what came next. But, looking at Kale's careful consideration for her comfort, she felt a warmth in her chest that told her she had made the right choice, even if it was completely impractical. "Are you feeling better?" she asked, noting that he seemed more alert and present than he had the previous day. "Better than I have in months," Kale admitted. "A full meal and a safe place to sleep work miracles that I had forgotten existed." Maya made them both breakfast from her limited supplies, and they sat together in the small living area, the morning routine feeling surprisingly natural despite the surreal circumstances. As they ate, Maya found herself studying Kale more closely, noticing things she had missed in the chaos of the previous day. There were scars across his arms and, visible on his neck, evidence of battles fought long ago. His hands, when he reached for his water glass, moved with a precision that spoke of years of training and discipline. Most telling of all was the way he held himself, even in the relaxed environment of her apartment. There was a readiness about him, a coiled potential energy that suggested that despite his age and recent hardships, he was far from helpless. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said, setting down her coffee cup. "What were you before the auction house?" Kale was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes distant, as if he were looking back across years and light years to a different life. "I was a pack leader," he said finally, "second in command of my clan's military forces. We were responsible for protecting our territorial boundaries and maintaining peace between the different lycanthropy settlements on Fenris Prime." The simple statement carried weight that Maya was only beginning to understand. Pack leader was not just a military rank among the lycanthropy. It was a position of tremendous responsibility and honor. The fact that Kale had held such a role spoke to capabilities and experience that the slave markets had completely ignored. "What happened?" Maya asked gently, sensing that this was painful territory, but needing to understand the person she had somehow become responsible for. "Pirates," Kale said, his voice hardening. "They have been hitting outer colonies for months, but we thought Fenris Prime was too well defended to be a target. We were wrong. They came during the Convergence Festival, when most of our military forces were attending ceremonial duties rather than manning defensive positions. By the time we realized what was happening, they had already captured hundreds of civilians." Maya could see the pain in his eyes as he continued. "I led a rescue mission to try to save as many as possible. We managed to evacuate most of the civilians, but the pirates had better weapons than we expected. My unit was overwhelmed, and those of us who survived were taken as prizes. Lycanthropy warriors fetch high prices in the slave markets, or so they told us. How long ago was this? Maya asked, though she was beginning to dread the answer. 14 standard months, Kale replied. I have been in captivity for 14 months, watching as potential buyers rejected me again and again because my age made me less valuable than younger specimens. The injustice of it hit Maya like a physical blow. Here was someone who had spent his life serving and protecting others, reduced to a commodity whose worth was measured only by his potential as property. The casual cruelty of the slave markets was bad enough when applied to unknown victims, but knowing Kale's story made it personal in a way that made her angry. Those people at the auction, Maya said, her voice tight with emotion, they had no idea what they were looking at. Experience and wisdom are less valuable than youth and obedience in the markets, Kale observed with bitter resignation. A younger lycanthropy can be trained to fight in gladiatorial arenas or work in dangerous mines without questioning orders. An older warrior like myself carries too much baggage, too much independence of thought. Maya stood abruptly, pacing to the small window that looked out onto Nexus Station's central hub. Ships were arriving and departing constantly, carrying cargo and passengers to destinations across the galaxy. It was a reminder of the vast scope of the universe and the countless injustices that occurred far from any authority that might intervene. This is wrong, she said, not really speaking to Kale, but needing to voice the anger she felt. Everything about this system is wrong. Yes, Kale agreed simply, but it is the reality we must navigate. Maya turned back to face him, struck by his matter-of-fact acceptance of circumstances that would have broken many people. How do you stand it? How do you keep going when everything around you seems designed to crush your spirit? Kale considered the question carefully before answering. When I was young, I thought strength meant never showing weakness, never admitting defeat. But years of leadership taught me that true strength often means enduring what seems unendurable until circumstances change. I survive because I believe that this situation is temporary, that there is still purpose for my life beyond what others have tried to reduce me to. The conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at Maya's door. Both of them froze, suddenly, reminded that their arrangement was far from normal or acceptable by station regulations. Maya had spent so much time getting to know Kale as a person that she had temporarily forgotten the practical challenges of their situation. Ms. Chun, a voice called from the corridor. This is building management. We need to speak with you about a noise complaint. Maya's heart sank. She had been dreading this moment since bringing Kale home. Nexus Station had strict regulations about residents, and there was no way to hide the presence of a 7-foot-tall lycanthropy in her tiny apartment. She looked at Kale, who was already standing and moving toward the bedroom, understanding without being told that his presence would only complicate matters. Just a moment, Maya called out, trying to keep her voice calm and normal. She gestured for Kale to wait in the bedroom and approached the door. The building manager was a middle-aged Andromedan with a bureaucratic bearing that seemed universal among his profession. Behind him stood 2 other residents of Maya's floor, both of whom looked distinctly uncomfortable. Ms. Chun, we've received reports of unusual sounds coming from your apartment, the manager said, consulting his tablet. Heavy footsteps, unfamiliar voices. As you know, station regulations are very clear about unauthorized occupants. I had a friend visiting, Maya said, which was technically true. We were just talking. I'm sorry if we were too loud. One of her neighbors, a human woman Maya had exchanged pleasantries with in the past, stepped forward. Maya, we saw you coming home yesterday with someone very large. We're just concerned about safety. This isn't exactly the kind of building that's equipped for exotic residents. Maya felt a flash of anger at the casual bigotry in the woman's words, the assumption that Kale was inherently dangerous because of his species and size. But she also recognized the genuine concern in their voices, and she knew that making enemies of her neighbors would only make the situation more difficult. I understand your concerns, Maya said carefully, but I can assure you that there's no danger to anyone. My friend is very peaceful. The building manager was not satisfied with her explanation. Ms. Chun, I'm going to need you to register any long-term guests with the management office. Station regulations require background checks and security deposits for non-human residents, particularly for species with enhanced physical capabilities. Maya's mind raced through the implications. A background check on Kale would immediately reveal his status as purchased property, which would open up an entirely new set of legal complications. The security deposit alone would probably cost more money than she had, and there's no guarantee that Kale would be approved for residence even if she could afford it. Of course, Maya said, stalling for time. I'll come by the office later today to take care of the paperwork. After the manager and neighbors left, Maya returned to her apartment to find Kale sitting on the edge of her bed, his expression grim. He had obviously heard every word of the conversation through the thin walls. I'm causing you problems, he said without preamble. This was inevitable, but I had hoped for more time to find an alternative solution. Maya sat down across from him, her mind already working through possibilities. We'll figure something out. There has to be a way to make this work. Maya, Kale said gently, using her name for the first time. You have shown me more kindness in 2 days than I experienced in 14 months of captivity. But I will not allow my presence to destroy your life. If necessary, I will return to the auction house. The casual way he suggested sacrificing himself to protect her hit Maya harder than she expected. In the short time she had known him, Kale had revealed himself to be someone of extraordinary character and integrity, someone who had spent his life protecting others and was prepared to continue doing so even when he was the one who needed protection. That's not going to happen, Maya said firmly. We just need to think outside the box. She spent the rest of the morning researching station regulations and housing options on her computer while Kale waited patiently, occasionally offering observations about galactic law from his years of military experience. What they discovered was not encouraging. The cost of legally registering Kale as a resident would consume most of Maya's savings, and there was no guarantee of approval. More troubling was the discovery that Nexus Station had specific protocols for dealing with unregistered slaves found in civilian areas. If building management discovered Kale's legal status, he could be confiscated and resold to cover the administrative costs of his processing. There has to be another way, Maya muttered, scrolling through pages of regulations and requirements. Perhaps there is, Kale said thoughtfully, but it would require you to trust me with information about your life that you might prefer to keep private. Maya looked up from her computer. What do you mean? You work in maintenance for the station, Kale said, which means you have access to areas and systems that most residents never see. You understand how Nexus Station actually functions beneath all the official procedures and regulations. Maya nodded slowly, beginning to understand where his thoughts were leading. I have spent my career learning to find solutions that work around official channels when necessary, Kale continued. Military operations often require improvisation and creative interpretation of rules. Perhaps together we can find a way to solve this problem that does not involve either bankruptcy or separation. Looking at Kale's thoughtful expression, Maya realized that she was seeing the pack leader he had once been. Despite everything he had endured, despite being reduced to property and rejected as worthless, his mind was still sharp and his instincts for problem-solving intact. The buyers at the auction house had seen only an aging warrior past his prime. Maya was beginning to understand that they had missed the most valuable qualities he possessed. All right, Maya said, closing her computer and giving Kale her full attention. Tell me what you're thinking. As Kale began to outline his ideas, Maya found herself impressed by the depth of his understanding of bureaucratic systems and the creative ways he approached seemingly impossible problems. More than that, she realized that this was the first time since bringing him home that she felt like they were partners working toward a solution rather than a rescuer, and victims struggling with circumstances beyond their control. The dynamic between them was shifting in ways that Maya had not expected. She had thought she was saving Kale, but as she listened to his careful analysis of their situation and his innovative suggestions for solutions, she began to understand that he might be saving her right back. Not from physical danger or immediate crisis, but from a life that had become small and routine, where the most excitement she experienced was fixing broken environmental systems and counting credits toward a trip home that always seemed just out of reach. Kale's presence was forcing her to think bigger, to consider possibilities she had never imagined, and to discover capabilities within herself that she had not known existed. The scared young woman who had impulsively bid at a slave auction was transforming into someone who could face complex challenges and find creative solutions. As they worked together to plan their next moves, Maya realized that whatever happened next, her life had fundamentally changed. The question was whether she was brave enough to see where that change would lead them both. Their planning session was interrupted by Maya's communication device chiming with an incoming message. She checked the screen and felt her stomach drop. It was from her supervisor at the maintenance department, requesting that she report for an emergency shift to deal with a major system failure in the lower levels of the station. "I have to go to work," Maya said, showing Kale the message. "There's some kind of crisis with the water recycling systems." Kale nodded understanding, but Maya could see the concern in his eyes. Being left alone in the apartment carried risks for both of them. If building management decided to conduct an unannounced inspection, or if the neighbor's suspicions led to station security involvement, Kale would have no protection and no legal recourse. "Will you be all right here by yourself?" Maya asked, hating the necessity of leaving him, but knowing she could not afford to refuse work assignments. "I will be careful," Kale assured her. "And Maya, whatever happens while you are gone, do not risk your position to protect me. Your job is too important to your future for you to sacrifice it for someone you have known for less than 3 days." As Maya gathered her work gear and prepared to leave, she found herself reluctant to go. In such a short time, Kale's presence had become a source of comfort and stability that she had not realized she was missing. More than that, she was beginning to worry about him with an intensity that surprised her. "I'll be back as soon as I can," she promised, pausing at the door. "I will be here," Kale replied, and something in his tone suggested that this simple promise carried more weight than casual reassurance. As Maya made her way through the station corridors toward the maintenance levels, she found herself thinking about trust and the strange ways it could develop between people. 3 days ago, she and Kale had been strangers. Now she was trusting him with her home and her future, while he was trusting her with his freedom and possibly his life. The water recycling emergency that had summoned her turned out to be more complex than initially reported, requiring several hours of detailed work in the cramped and humid tunnels beneath the station's main levels. As Maya crawled through maintenance shafts and recalibrated filtration systems, her mind kept drifting back to Kale waiting in her apartment. She realized that somewhere in the past few days, her feelings toward him had evolved far beyond the simple sympathy that had motivated her impulsive purchase at the auction. She was beginning to care about him in ways that went beyond basic human decency or the satisfaction of helping someone in need. The thought of anything happening to him while she was away filled her with an anxiety that was both uncomfortable and revelatory. By the time Maya finished her emergency assignment and began the journey back to her apartment, the artificial day cycle of the station was transitioning toward evening. She was tired, dirty from her work, and increasingly anxious about what she might find when she returned home. As she approached her apartment door, Maya could hear the soft sound of movement from within, confirming that Kale was still there and apparently safe. But when she entered, she found him standing by the window with an expression of quiet concern that immediately put her on alert. "What's wrong?" Maya asked, dropping her toolkit and moving to stand beside him. Kale gestured toward the view outside her window, where Maya could see 2 figures in station security uniforms talking to her building manager in the courtyard below. "They arrived about an hour ago," Kale said quietly. "They have been asking questions about recent changes in occupancy, unusual activity, anything that might indicate unauthorized residence." Maya felt her heart sink as she watched the security officers consulting their tablets and gesturing toward the residential buildings. It seemed that their time was running out faster than they had hoped, and the solutions they had been working on might not come together quickly enough to save them. "We need to accelerate our plans," Kale said, his voice calm despite the gravity of their situation. Maya nodded, looking at the security officers below and then at Kale's resolute expression. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The thought was both terrifying and oddly comforting as they prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. The security officers were moving systematically through the building, Maya realized as she watched from her window. They were conducting door-to-door inquiries, checking resident registrations against their records, and asking specific questions about any unusual activity. It was only a matter of time before they reached her floor. "How long do we have?" Maya asked, her mind racing through possibilities. Kale studied the officers' methodical approach and calculated their progress. Perhaps 20 minutes before they reach this level. 30 at most if they encounter residents who are particularly talkative. Maya felt the familiar calm that descended over her during maintenance emergencies, the focused clarity that allowed her to diagnose complex problems quickly and efficiently. This was just another system failure that needed to be solved, she told herself, even as her hands trembled slightly while she gathered essential items. "The maintenance tunnels," she said suddenly. "I can get you out of the building through the service corridors. They connect to the main utility passages that run throughout this section of the station." Kale nodded approvingly. "And then? There's an unused storage facility in the lower industrial sector," Maya explained, pulling up building schematics on her personal tablet. "It's been abandoned since the station reconfigured the cargo handling systems 5 years ago. No one goes there anymore except for routine environmental checks, and I'm scheduled to do those checks next week anyway." "You would hide me in a storage facility?" Kale asked, his tone neutral, but his eyes betraying a flicker of something that might have been disappointment. Maya looked up from her tablet, suddenly understanding his concern. "Not hide you. Give us time to implement the plan we discussed earlier. The storage facility has environmental controls, water access, and space for you to move around safely while we work on a permanent solution." The distinction was important to both of them. Hiding implied shame and permanent concealment. What Maya was proposing was a strategic retreat to buy them time to find a real solution to their problem. "The service entrance to my building connects to the main utility grid," Maya continued, warming to her plan. "I can guide you through the passages to the storage facility, and then I can return to my apartment before the security officers reach my door. When they ask about unusual activity, I'll tell them the truth, that I had a friend visiting who left this afternoon." Kale studied her face carefully. "This plan requires you to lie to station security. If they discover the deception, the consequences for you could be severe." Maya met his gaze steadily. "The consequences of them finding you here would be worse. For both of us." The simple acknowledgement that they were truly in this together seemed to settle something between them. Kale had been prepared to sacrifice himself to protect Maya's future, but she was making it clear that she was equally prepared to take risks for his safety. They moved quickly but quietly through Maya's apartment, gathering supplies that Kale might need for an extended stay in the storage facility. Maya packed food, water, blankets, and a portable communication device that would allow them to stay in contact. Kale contributed his practical knowledge of what would be necessary for survival in potentially uncomfortable conditions. The most difficult moment came when Maya had to attach the control collar around Kale's neck. The collar was necessary for their deception. If anyone spotted them in the service corridors, it would explain Kale's presence as a legally owned slave accompanying his owner on station business. But the act of placing the symbol of enslavement around the neck of someone she had come to respect and care for felt like a betrayal. "I'm sorry," Maya whispered as she activated the collar's basic functions while carefully leaving the pain compliance systems disabled. "It is just a tool," Kale said gently, though she could see the tension in his jaw as the collar locked into place. We will use it to serve our purposes rather than allowing it to define our relationship. The service corridors of Nexus Station were a hidden world that most residents never saw. Behind the polished public areas lay a complex network of maintenance passages, utility tunnels, and emergency access routes that kept the massive space station functioning. Maya had spent years learning these passages, understanding the flow of air and water and power that sustained life for hundreds of thousands of inhabitants. Leading Kale through the narrow corridors, Maya was struck by how different he seemed in this environment. The cramped quarters of her apartment had made his size seem overwhelming, but here in the functional spaces behind the station's facade, he moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to operating in challenging terrain. His military background was evident in the way he navigated obstacles and remained alert for potential dangers. They encountered two maintenance workers during their journey, but both simply nodded at Maya and continued with their tasks. The sight of a maintenance engineer accompanied by a collared alien was unusual, but not unprecedented. The service areas of Nexus Station were practical places where the normal social rules of the residential sections gave way to the necessities of keeping essential systems operational. The abandoned storage facility was exactly as Maya remembered it, a cavernous space that had once housed cargo containers awaiting transport to other systems. The environmental controls were still functional, maintaining breathable atmosphere and comfortable temperature despite the lack of regular occupancy. Emergency lighting provided sufficient illumination to navigate safely, and the facility's location in the industrial sector meant that casual visitors were extremely unlikely. "It's not much," Maya said as she helped Kale settle into the space they had chosen for his temporary residence, a corner area that offered both privacy and quick access to the exit routes they had identified. "It is perfect," Kale replied, and Maya could hear the genuine gratitude in his voice. "I have privacy, safety, and freedom of movement. 3 days ago, I would not have dared to hope for any of those things." Maya set up the communication device and showed Kale how to contact her if any problems arose. They agreed on a schedule for her visits that would allow her to bring supplies and work on their long-term plans without arousing suspicion from her supervisors or neighbors. "I should get back," Maya said reluctantly, checking the time on her tablet. "The security officers will be reaching my floor soon." Kale stood as she prepared to leave, his imposing frame seeming oddly vulnerable in the vast, empty space of the storage facility. "Maya," he said as she reached the exit, "thank you. Not just for this, but for seeing something in me that no one else has seen for a very long time." The sincerity in his voice made Maya's chest tighten with emotion she was not prepared to examine too closely. "I'll see you tomorrow," she promised. And then she was gone, retracing her path through the maintenance corridors toward her apartment and the confrontation that awaited her there. Maya reached her apartment with only minutes to spare. She had just enough time to shower off the grime from the maintenance tunnels and change into casual clothes before the security officers knocked on her door. When she opened it, she was able to project the calm demeanor of someone who had spent a quiet evening at home after a long day at work. The officers were professional but thorough, asking about her recent activities, any visitors she might have had, and whether she had noticed anything unusual in the building. Maya answered their questions honestly wherever possible, acknowledging that she had indeed had a friend visit the previous day, but explaining that he had left that afternoon. "What species was your visitor?" one of the officers asked, consulting his tablet. "Lycanthropy," Maya replied, having anticipated the question. The officers exchanged glances. "Male, approximately 7 feet tall." Maya's heart pounded, but she kept her expression neutral. "Yes. Is there some problem?" "We're following up on reports of an unregistered alien resident in this building," the second officer explained. "The physical description matches what witnesses reported seeing." "Well, as I said, he was visiting, but he left this afternoon," Maya said. "I can show you his departure was logged by building security, if that would help." This was the moment of greatest risk in their deception. Maya was counting on the fact that building security was automated and impersonal, tracking movement through the main entrances but not monitoring the service areas she and Kale had used. Her confidence proved justified when the officers consulted their records and found no evidence of Kale's continued presence in the building. After the officers left, Maya sat alone in her apartment, processing what had just happened. She had successfully lied to station security to protect someone who had been a stranger less than a week ago. More importantly, she had committed herself to a course of action that would require sustained deception and careful planning for an indefinite period. The magnitude of what she had undertaken was beginning to sink in. Kale was now dependent on her for his safety, his sustenance, and ultimately his freedom. She had taken responsibility for another person's life in a way she had never experienced before. The weight of that responsibility was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. Maya spent the rest of the evening researching legal options and exploring the plans that she and Kale had discussed earlier. The more she learned about galactic law and the systems governing alien residency, the more complex their situation appeared. But she also discovered loopholes and alternative approaches that might offer solutions if they were clever and persistent enough to exploit them. The following day, Maya visited Kale during her lunch break, bringing food and updates on her research. She found him in remarkably good spirits, considering his circumstances, having used his time to explore the storage facility and identify ways to make his temporary residence more comfortable and secure. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," Kale said as they shared the meal Maya had brought, "about trust and partnership and finding solutions to impossible problems." "What about it?" Maya asked. "In my culture, when two individuals face insurmountable challenges together, when they're willing to risk their safety for each other's well-being, it creates bonds that extend beyond simple friendship or alliance," Kale explained. "Among the lycanthropy, we would say that you and I are becoming pack-bonded." Maya was not entirely sure what that meant, but she could hear the significance in Kale's voice. "Is that good or bad?" "It is rare and precious," Kale said simply, "and it means that whatever solutions we find to our current problems, we will face future challenges together as well." The idea of a long-term partnership with Kale had not occurred to Maya in concrete terms, but as she considered it, she realized that the prospect did not frighten her as much as it should have. In a short time she had known him, Kale had proven to be intelligent, resourceful, loyal, and possessed of a moral compass that complemented her own values. "I've been thinking too," Maya said, "about why I bought you at the auction, what I was really responding to when I saw you in that cage." Kale waited for her to continue, his amber eyes attentive and patient. "I think I was responding to recognition," Maya said slowly, working through thoughts she was only beginning to understand. "Not that I knew you specifically, but that I recognized something in you that I had been missing in my own life." "What was that?" Kale asked gently. "Purpose," Maya said. "Direction. The sense that what I was doing mattered beyond just earning enough credits to survive. When I saw you, I saw someone who had lived a life of meaning, someone who had taken responsibility for things larger than himself. And I think I wanted to be part of something like that." Kale nodded slowly. "The pack leader you saw in me recognized the pack leader potential in you." It was the first time anyone had ever suggested that Maya possessed leadership qualities, and the idea was both flattering and intimidating. But as she thought about the decisions she had made over the past few days, the risks she had taken, and the problems she had solved, she began to see herself through Kale's eyes. Their conversation was interrupted by the communication device, alerting them to an incoming message. Maya checked the display and felt her stomach drop. It was from building management, requesting that she come to the office at her earliest convenience to discuss irregularities in her residency documentation. "They're not giving up," Maya said, showing Kale the message. "No," Kale agreed, "which means we need to accelerate our timeline for finding a permanent solution." Over the next several days, Maya and Kale worked together to implement the most promising of their alternative strategies. Using Kale's military expertise and Maya's knowledge of station systems. They identified ways to navigate bureaucratic obstacles and exploit regulatory loopholes. Their plan was ambitious and required careful coordination. Maya would apply for a transfer to a different section of Nexus Station, one that specialized in interspecies cooperation and had more flexible residency requirements. Kale would use his military experience and technical knowledge to qualify for civilian employment in station security or logistics, positions that would provide him with legal residency status independent of his previous classification as property. The plan required them to present themselves as an established partnership seeking to formalize their working relationship, rather than as a human and her recently purchased alien slave. It was a delicate deception that required both of them to transform their circumstances through sheer force of will and careful presentation. Maya began by requesting meetings with supervisors in other departments, presenting herself as an experienced maintenance engineer interested in expanding her skills and taking on greater responsibilities. Her years of reliable service and her deep knowledge of station systems made her a valuable potential transfer candidate. Meanwhile, Kale used his temporary access to station databases through Maya's credentials to research employment opportunities and prepare application materials that highlighted his leadership experience and technical skills without explicitly mentioning his recent captivity. The most challenging aspect of their plan was timing. They needed to coordinate their applications and interviews to create the impression of an existing partnership while avoiding questions about their living arrangements or the exact nature of their relationship. As Maya attended meetings and submitted applications, she found herself changing in ways she had not expected. The process of advocating for herself and presenting her capabilities to potential supervisors was forcing her to recognize skills and qualities she had previously taken for granted. She began to see herself as Kale saw her, someone capable of leadership and complex problem-solving. The transformation was evident to others as well. Maya's current supervisor commented on her increased confidence and initiative. Her neighbors noticed that she seemed more focused and purposeful. Even casual acquaintances remarked that she appeared to be thriving in ways that had not been apparent before. What Maya was discovering was that helping Kale had awakened something within herself that had been dormant for years. The routine of her previous life, the simple cycle of work and sleep and saving credits for a future that never seemed to arrive, had been gradually crushing her spirit in ways she had not recognized until she found herself fighting for something that truly mattered. As their plans began to take shape and the possibility of success became more real, Maya realized that whatever the outcome of their efforts, she had already been transformed by the experience. The scared young woman who had impulsively bid at a slave auction was gone, replaced by someone who could conceive and execute complex strategies to overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. But even as their prospects improved, new challenges emerged that would test everything they had built together and force them to make decisions that would determine not just their immediate future, but the kind of people they would choose to become. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after Maya and Kale had implemented their ambitious plan. Maya received notification that her transfer application to the Interspecies Relations Department had been approved, contingent on her completion of a probationary project that would demonstrate her ability to work effectively with diverse alien cultures. The project would require her to partner with a qualified, non-human specialist in developing improved protocols for cultural integration on Nexus Station. At the same time, Kale received a response to his employment application with station security. His military background and tactical expertise had impressed the hiring supervisors, but they wanted to conduct an in-person interview to assess his suitability for positions involving public safety and cross-species coordination. "The timing is perfect," Maya said as they reviewed the developments during one of their evening meetings in the storage facility. "If we coordinate our presentations correctly, we can position ourselves as an established working partnership that the station would benefit from formalizing." Kale nodded, but Maya could see concern in his amber eyes. The interview process will require background verification. There is no way to avoid questions about my recent history. This was the aspect of their plan that had worried them both from the beginning. Cale's military credentials were legitimate and impressive, but his recent status as enslaved property would inevitably come to light during any thorough background check. They would need to find a way to address this history without allowing it to overshadow his qualifications and potential value to the station. "We tell the truth," Maya said firmly. "Not all of it, and not in the way that makes you look like a victim, but we don't lie about the basic facts. And if they decide that a former slave is too much of a security risk," Cale asked. Maya had been preparing for this possibility. "Then we emphasize that someone with your experience of injustice and institutional failure would be uniquely qualified to identify and prevent similar problems within station systems. Your perspective could be an asset rather than a liability." It was a bold strategy that required them to reframe Cale's recent experiences as qualifications rather than disqualifications. But as they worked together to prepare for the interviews, Maya realized that this approach was more than just tactical positioning. Cale's experiences had indeed given him insights and capabilities that someone with a more conventional background might lack. The first test of their strategy came when Maya met with Dr. Vicina Toller, the Andromedan administrator who supervised the interspecies relations department. Dr. Toller was known throughout the station for her rigorous standards and her ability to identify cultural conflicts before they escalated into serious problems. "Ms. Chun," Dr. Toller said as Maya seated herself in the spacious office that overlooked the station's central hub, "your maintenance supervisor speaks very highly of your technical skills and reliability. But interspecies relations requires capabilities that extend far beyond technical expertise. What makes you believe you would be successful in this field?" Maya had anticipated this question and had prepared an answer that drew directly from her experiences with Cale, though without revealing specific details. "I believe that successful interspecies relations depends on the ability to see past surface differences and recognize the common values that unite different cultures. My recent work with a lycanthropy consultant has taught me that assumptions based on appearance or reputation often prevent us from recognizing valuable perspectives and capabilities." Dr. Toller's antennae twitched with interest. "You've been working with a lycanthropy consultant? That's unusual for someone in maintenance engineering." "It started as a personal project," Maya explained, staying as close to the truth as possible. "I was interested in learning more about lycanthropy culture and military organization. Through our conversations, I began to understand how differently various species approach problem solving and conflict resolution. It opened my eyes to how much the station could benefit from actively incorporating diverse perspectives into our operational protocols. And this consultant would be available to continue working with you if your transfer is approved?" Dr. Toller asked. Maya felt her heart rate increase, but kept her voice steady. "Yes, he's currently exploring employment opportunities with station administration. His background in military leadership and tactical planning could complement my technical expertise." Dr. Toller made notes on her tablet before continuing. "I'd like to meet this consultant of yours. Would it be possible to arrange an introduction?" This was the moment Maya had been hoping for. "Actually, he has an interview scheduled with station security later this week. Perhaps you could coordinate with them to evaluate his potential for cross-departmental collaboration." The meeting concluded with Dr. Toller expressing cautious optimism about Maya's application, while emphasizing that final approval would depend on her ability to demonstrate practical results in interspecies cooperation. Maya left the office feeling that the first phase of their plan had been successful, but knowing that the real test would come when Cale faced his own interview process. Cale's interview with station security took place 3 days later in the administrative complex that housed the station's law enforcement and safety departments. Maya had wanted to accompany him for moral support, but they had agreed that it would be better for him to present himself as an independent professional rather than someone who needed advocacy from his human partner. Commander Sarah Blake, the human officer who conducted Cale's interview, was known for her no-nonsense approach to personnel decisions. She had served in various military and law enforcement roles throughout the galaxy and had earned respect for her ability to assess character and competence quickly and accurately. "Mr. Kale," Commander Blake began, consulting the file that contained his application materials, "your military credentials are impressive. Pack leader, decorated veteran, extensive experience in tactical planning and interclan negotiations. But there's a 14-month gap in your employment history that you've listed simply as personal leave. I'm going to need more details about that period." Kale had prepared for this moment during countless conversations with Maya about how to present his story truthfully without allowing his past circumstances to overshadow his current capabilities. "I was captured during a pirate raid on my homeworld," Kale said directly. "I spent 14 months in various forms of captivity before managing to secure my freedom and make my way to Nexus Station." Commander Blake's expression remained neutral, but Kale could see her reassessing him as she processed this information. "That's quite an ordeal. How do I know that experience hasn't compromised your judgment or left you with psychological instabilities that could affect your performance?" "Because I'm here," Kale replied simply. "Because I survived 14 months of conditions designed to break my spirit and emerge with my principles intact. Because I used that time to observe and analyze systems of control and manipulation, giving me insights into criminal psychology and institutional vulnerabilities that could benefit station security." It was a confident response that reframed his experiences as professional assets, and Commander Blake nodded approvingly. "Fair point. And how did you secure your freedom? Did you escape? Were you rescued? Or were you released?" This was the most delicate moment of the interview. Kale's answer would need to acknowledge Maya's role without making it seem like he was dependent on her for his current circumstances. "I was purchased at a slave auction by a human maintenance engineer named Maya Chen," Kale said matter-of-factly. "Ms. Chun recognized that my age and experience represented value that the slave markets had failed to appreciate. Rather than treating me as property, she offered me partnership and the opportunity to rebuild my career. We have been working together since then to develop innovative approaches to interspecies cooperation and cultural integration." Commander Blake raised an eyebrow. "She bought you at a slave auction and then offered you partnership? That's an unusual approach to employee recruitment." "Ms. Chen saw potential where others saw only liability," Kale explained. "Her willingness to invest in someone that the market had written off demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative thinking that could benefit station administration. Our collaboration has already produced valuable insights into cultural conflict resolution and resource optimization." The interview continued for another hour, with Commander Blake probing Kale's technical knowledge, his leadership philosophy, and his understanding of the complex political dynamics that govern life on a diverse space station like Nexus. Kale's responses demonstrated not only his military expertise, but also the wisdom and perspective that came from his years of experience and his recent trials. When the interview concluded, Commander Blake was direct in her assessment. "Your qualifications are excellent, and your experience gives you perspectives that could be valuable to our operations. I'm recommending you for a position in our Cultural Liaison Unit, working with Dr. Toller's department on integration protocols. The position comes with standard residential privileges and a salary commensurate with your experience level." Kale felt a surge of emotion that he carefully controlled. After months of being told he was worthless, having his capabilities recognized and valued by a respected professional was almost overwhelming. "There is one condition," Commander Blake continued. "I want to meet with Ms. Chun to understand the dynamics of your working relationship. If you're going to be representing station security in interspecies negotiations, I need to be confident that your partnership is based on mutual respect and shared professional goals rather than residual dependencies from your previous circumstances." Kale agreed to the condition, understanding that this final step would either validate everything he and Maya had worked toward or expose the vulnerabilities in their carefully constructed narrative. The meeting between Maya, Kale, Commander Blake, and Dr. Toller took place in a conference room overlooking the station's main docking bays. As ships arrived and departed outside the windows, the four of them discussed the proposed collaboration between the maintenance, security, and interspecies relations departments. Maya presented their preliminary research into cultural conflict patterns on the station, highlighting areas where better communication protocols could prevent misunderstandings from escalating into serious problems. Kale contributed tactical analysis of how different species approach conflict resolution, offering insights that could improve security responses to interspecies disputes. The synergy between their perspectives was evident to both supervisors, who recognized that Maya and Kale had developed a working relationship that maximized their individual strengths while compensating for their respective limitations. Ms. Chun, Dr. Toller said, as the meeting neared its conclusion, your technical background combined with your developing expertise in cultural analysis represents exactly the kind of cross-disciplinary approach our department needs. And Mr. Kale, your military experience and personal understanding of institutional failure could help us identify systemic problems before they become crises. Commander Blake nodded agreement. I'm prepared to approve both of your applications. Ms. Chun, your transfer to interspecies relations is confirmed. Mr. Kale, welcome to station security. You'll both start in probationary positions next week, with full status pending successful completion of your initial projects. As they left the administrative complex with their new employment authorizations and residential permits, Maya and Kale found themselves walking side by side through the station corridors with a freedom and legitimacy they had not possessed since Maya's impulsive purchase at the slave auction. We did it, Maya said quietly, still processing the magnitude of what they had accomplished. We did, Kale agreed, though I suspect this is just the beginning of the changes we'll experience. He was right. Over the following months, Maya and Kale threw themselves into their new roles with enthusiasm and dedication that impressed their supervisors and colleagues. Maya's technical expertise proved invaluable in developing practical solutions to cultural integration challenges, while Kale's military background and analytical skills made him one of the most effective cultural liaisons in station security. More importantly, their partnership continued to evolve and deepen. The professional collaboration that had begun as a strategic necessity became a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. They challenged each other intellectually, supported each other emotionally, and discovered that their different backgrounds and perspectives made them both more effective than either could have been alone. Maya found that working with Kale had awakened ambitions and capabilities she had not known she possessed. Her confidence grew as she took on more complex projects and greater responsibilities. Her supervisors began to see her as a rising star within the interspecies relations department, someone who could eventually move into leadership roles. Kale, meanwhile, discovered that his experience of injustice and survival had not broken him, but had instead prepared him for work that required both strength and compassion. His ability to understand and relate to beings who felt marginalized or misunderstood made him exceptionally effective at preventing conflicts and building bridges between different communities on the station. 6 months after their first meeting at the slave auction, Maya and Kale were assigned to lead a major initiative to redesign the station's cultural integration protocols. The project would affect how hundreds of thousands of beings from dozens of species interacted with each other and with station administration. As they worked late one evening in their shared office, reviewing proposals and planning implementation strategies, Maya reflected on how much their lives had changed. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't bid on you that day?" she asked. Kale looked up from the cultural analysis reports he was reviewing. "Every day," he said simply. "I think about how close I came to giving up hope entirely. And I think about how many others are still trapped in circumstances that seem hopeless but might not be." Maya nodded, understanding what he was suggesting without needing him to spell it out. Their success had given them resources and influence that they could use to help others in similar situations. The Underground Railroad, Maya said, referencing an ancient Earth historical movement that had helped enslaved people escape to freedom. Something like that, Cale agreed. But legal, official, and systematic. We could work within the system to create legitimate pathways for beings who have been written off by the markets to rebuild their lives and contribute their capabilities to society. It was an ambitious vision that would require careful planning and significant resources to implement. But as Maya looked at Cale's determined expression and thought about everything they had already accomplished together, she found herself believing that they could make it work. The former slave and the maintenance engineer who had impulsively saved him had become partners in ways they never could have imagined. They had not only transformed their own lives, but had positioned themselves to transform the lives of countless others who were trapped in systems that measured worth only by youth and immediate utility. Their story had begun with rejection and desperation in the darkest corner of a slave auction. It was continuing with hope, purpose, and the growing understanding that the most valuable qualities in any being are often the ones that the market fails to recognize. As they planned their next steps together, Maya and Cale knew that their greatest adventures still lay ahead of them. In the end, Cale had been right about being too old for what the buyers at the auction wanted. But he had been exactly the right age for what Maya needed and what the galaxy needed. Sometimes the best partnerships form when someone is willing to see value where everyone else sees only liability. And sometimes the most powerful changes begin with a simple act of kindness from someone who refuses to accept that anyone is truly worthless. Their journey had taught them both that age brings wisdom, that experience carries value beyond immediate utility, and that the connections formed through shared struggle and mutual respect can overcome any obstacle that society tries to place in their way. The alien wolf who had been rejected as too old had found not just freedom, but purpose, partnership, and the chance to ensure that others would never face the same rejection he had endured.